Brian, I'm so delighted to have you here today. I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you have a lot of strings to your bow that are going to be so helpful to everyone listening. So yeah, I would love to know who you are, how you help people, and then we'll get stuck into it.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Becca. It's great to be here. So my name is Brian O'Hengisa. I have a background as a nutritionist. So I did a nutrition degree originally in UCD, and then got into nutrition coaching off the back of that, and health coaching overall. So we look at sort of holistic health coaching with nutrition as the emphasis on that, right? And then I've been doing that for quite a few years now at this stage. And then more recently, I suppose I was doing a lot of work with people on their relationship with food and things like disordered eating, along with lots of other sort of nutrition type things. Like I tend to have like quite a mix of work that I do with people. Like could be digestive issues, it could be, performance, nutrition, body composition. But then a lot of this disordered eating stuff was coming up, and I was doing good work with people on that. So I've been doing that for the last few years as like a good chunk of my client base, because I do like online nutrition coaching essentially. And then last year I started a master's degree in cognitive behavior therapy and counseling. So I'm working away at that. And the point of that was to be able to help people with more severe disordered eating disorders as well, and really complement the coaching work that I do in the nutrition aspect. So bringing all that stuff together with the psychological components as well. That was the motivation for that. Like, I want to stay in that line of work. I just want to be able to help more people in that space, with that extra set of skills and qualifications. So that's a very short version of how I am sitting here today. But yeah, Triage Method is the company I work with. So we do all sorts of online coaching. We do physiotherapy, we do personal training, nutrition coaching, and then I'm doing this sort of psychotherapy element as well for people who want it.
I think that's so important and so complementary to everything you do, having like the cognitive behavioral therapy and the psychotherapy. And I think it's becoming more and more apparent how important that is when you're dealing with anyone in terms of even any type of behavior change, that you have like that really clear idea of how the psychological component is the make or break element. Like, you can do everything with a nutritionist and they can give you all the steps, no matter what your background is. But if you don't have that psychological component, the implementation long-term is so difficult. So it's just so nice to hear you're putting in so much extra time, energy, effort to complement everything you're doing. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Nice. I think as well, I came across Brian the very first time of one of my very first clients, and she said she had worked with you in Triage, and the approach you do is so like all encompassing. I love that, and that's everything I'm about as well. And understanding as well. Earlier on we were saying, I'm actually so excited to talk about like the disordered eating side of it, because I think now more than ever, especially women, even a lot of men now more as well, are noticing how much that's a huge part of their lives. And way more than I thought in my 20s, and I had probably a decade of very disordered eating. I really thought I was in the minority. And now the more I talk to clients, the more I speak on social media, the more I realize it's so common, but so underspoken about. But that experience for me made me completely see there are some people, and especially you see them on the internet, that actually are almost robotic and could follow a meal plan. And they actually don't have many things in their past that made their relationship with food anything big. So there are them people out there, which for me is mind-blowing. Because for a lot of people like myself, because of your upbringing and different things that happened in the past, your foodscape is different. And the way your relationship with food is different. So I think it's very difficult when there's a black and white message online and somebody says, just, calorie deficit, all that stuff we're hearing a lot. Just be in the calorie deficit, as simple as that. But we're complex beings. And for a majority of people, it's not that simple to just stick to a calorie deficit. And the regulation piece of the puzzle is so important, but also understanding how you got to where you are now. So for you and all the people you deal with, I assume they're more in the complexity side of it, where there's a lot of different factors that led to them having disordered eating disorders, binge eating, whatever it may be. So how does that look for you with clients now when you're dealing with someone and you're trying to piece together a strategy for them? You're trying to understand.
Yeah, it's a good question, and really important points you made in terms of like the complexity of this stuff, like the biopsychosocial model. If anyone ever Googles like an image of that, like it's just an absolute mess of different factors that will contribute to something like health in like a broad sense. So for myself and my clients, we're usually doing like so what the service sort of looks like is we'll do regular therapy sessions alongside the nutrition coaching and lifestyle coaching. So in those, say, early CBT sessions that I'm doing with clients, then we're trying to do a case conceptualization and say like, okay, what's like the equation of disordered eating for you? Like what contributes to it for you and what purpose does it serve? I think that's a really important thing to consider. Because all behavior serves a purpose. It may not be the most helpful way to get what you need, but it might be the only way you know how.
Yeah.
And that sort of speaks to your question in terms of where do people like learn these things. So, I often talk about like this idea of baggage in therapy. And I don't mean baggage in terms of like the traditional therapy way it's spoken about. I just mean like literally stuff you've picked up along the way, right? Through experience, through your environment. There's definitely a big genetic component, as there is with all sort of health aspects. So that certainly plays into it. So, it's that usual thing of like, okay, are your genetics predisposing you to something like this? And then does your environment facilitate it?
Nature, nurture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's definitely going to be both. And yeah, it can be lots of things, the environment where someone's grown up. It could be things like food insecurity will contribute to this, really high intensity emotion in relation to hunger, for example, which, makes people deal with that.
Yeah.
Or almost overreact to it, assuming they don't have food insecurity anymore. Like I've had clients in that sort of context where, if they start to feel a bit hungry, is like almost like an alarm bell going off, and then they're immediately scanning for like, okay, where can I get something to eat, right? So we have to work through that. The learned, like I said, ways to cope, like giving kids a treat, for example, if they're upset, that starts to reinforce maybe the emotional comforting element of food. There's, so if we think about like what sort of normal eating looks like or intuitive eating, I think is probably the closest thing to that as like a defined system. We can start moving away from that, like as soon as we're told things like, you need to finish your plate, and because that starts to move people away from like, okay, I'm using internal cues to regulate how much I'm going to eat. So there's some of the early sort of experiences that will form someone's relation with food, and then I think the diet culture components have a lot to answer for, right? So in that sense, in the environment where you grew up, how were people talking about food? Like, were they labeling it like this food is good, this food is bad, or I'm being bold now because I'm eating this chocolate, or I'm sort of off my diet? Was there discussion about dieting?
Yes.
That sort of stuff, and also how people talk about bodies as well.
Yes.
Is it quite judgmental? Is it emotionally charged versus being more neutral? So I think all those things are some of the main contributing factors.
For sure. Yeah. And I think when I did so many years of therapy around disordered eating, and like you say, there's so many different factors that influence it. And a massive thing for me, the realization really hit me, was that when I focused on restriction, and at the time teamed with a lot of overexercise, that for me was an avoidance strategy of just avoiding the emotions I didn't want to feel. So I actually put a lot of my mental energy into like beating myself up around food and exercise, because that was less painful at the time for me than actually completely dealing with the emotions. So it was a huge avoidance technique. But then also there was a lot of factors growing up that play into it. Like, your aunties, especially I have like 5 aunties, and they're like a gang, and they're all have different ideas about food. And especially when they grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, they have these really crazy ideas about food that were passed on to me and my sister and brother. And it's very interesting to like deconstruct that and understand. And you're so right, like good versus bad. And oh, that person, there was always that thing, oh, isn't she so thin? She's so beautiful. You know, that's like drilled into you when you're younger. And then if you're not that, you feel guilt. And it was that, you know, that cycle of restriction. And then of course, when you undereat, what's the opposing action is you overeat. And that cycle continues, you know. And I think even if you don't have disordered eating, that's something to remember. Like if you undereat, you're going to overeat eventually. And then the cycle persists. But when we go back to that, I always think about the feelings it brings as well. And I heard you say this in a different podcast about feelings not being facts. And I think that's a really big part of when you're working with any client, that you're trying to put that emphasis on like a reality check.
Yeah, it's a huge part of like a coaching job or a therapist job is to like provide this objective input of the situation. And say one of the most common ones, so the facts and feeling, or taking facts as feelings, is one of the main cognitive distortions. And CBT talks a lot about cognitive distortions. They're just like unhelpful ways of thinking. You know, often in the literature, you'll see like it's often talked about as like irrational thoughts or illogical thoughts. I don't like to use those words because, like, you know, I don't want to tell someone that like, oh, your thinking is irrational, your thinking is illogical. So I prefer helpful and unhelpful, or maybe healthy and unhealthy, depending on which way you want to go with that. So we say unhelpful, but taking facts as feelings is one of the unhelpful ways of thinking. But then another one would be should statements. So that's super common, and that's because you mentioned reality check. That's one of the more common ways that will come up. So whenever we are saying things like, I should have done this, or I shouldn't have done that, or I must do this, I must do that, I must be this way, I mustn't be that way.
Yeah.
All of that is a denial of reality, because you're saying that things essentially shouldn't be the way they are based on what actually happened or what is going to happen. And that wastes a lot of emotional time and energy. That's one of the unhelpful belief systems where we make what's called like rigid demands of, say, ourselves, of other people, of the world. And then one of the ways you reframe that in cognitive therapy is to change should statements to preferences.
Yeah.
So I would prefer to not have been.
That's really helpful when we say that. Yeah. And my clients are probably listening now, and she's like, she's going to say it. Self-compassion, you know, like don't say it. And that compassion-focused therapy and really like reframing things is just so incredibly helpful. Yeah. And I think even for yourself, when you say, oh, I shouldn't have done that, don't do that again, versus like, I accept what I just done. That's just so powerful in terms of not keep doing this cycle of self-sabotage.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of it is like how you treat yourself in those moments, in those situations. You'll not be dishonest with yourself, let's say. And, you know, being compassionate is often a feat of strength, and it takes courage to be compassionate, because you will also have to acknowledge that maybe this didn't go according to plan.
Of course, yeah.
But do you also need to be really self-deprecating at the same time? No, you don't. And then, you know, with the compassion-focused therapy theory, that self-criticism just keeps activating the threat system, which if you are prone to something like emotional eating to self-soothe, then it's just going to feed into a cycle there as well, which is obviously unhelpful, and it's not something you want to be stuck in. So
that's a really great point to sit with, actually, when you realize that the negative thoughts alone, or the talk that's unhelpful, can bring your body into a sense of dysregulation and fight or flight mode. Just the thoughts alone.
Yep.
And then, of course, what's a lot of people's main coping mechanism is food. So the irony of that in itself is actually crazy when you really think about it, that it's just a cycle. Yeah.
It's a perpetuating cycle if you continue the self-criticism that keeps negative emotions ramped up, keeps the threat system ramped up, rather than trying to activate the soothe system, which again is where the compassion element comes in. Being kind with yourself and being fair with yourself, and treating yourself like you would treat someone you really care about is kind of the good rule of thumb for compassionate action, I think.
That was such a huge part for me of coming to where I am now, when my relationship with food is far more positive, is the regulation tools. Obviously, I wrote a guide on it. I was so passionate about it because it, for me, without having them, the other tools to cope with, of course, you're going to default back to your old behaviors and your old habits. So, like, I can't really stress enough of how many hundreds of people I've seen, thousands even at this stage, of how when they integrate the regulation into their day, like they habit stack it, it's an automatic part of their day. You just notice that need to, like, and unless anyone's experienced it before, it's hard to actually articulate it, that need and obsession around food. That dissipates so much when you are in more of a regulated state, because a lot of people that are, and as you well know, that are emotional eating a lot, they are in a state of dysregulation a lot. So it's such a huge part of that healing journey is that coping, like what's your other tools? And I speak about it a lot, like what brings you into flow state? What are them things you do during the day that give you headspace? And that's massive. And you speak about that a lot, of how you pause instead of going into autopilot.
Yeah.
And what's giving you that 3-5 minutes of not going straight into the old behavior, like breaking the habit loop. And I love how you put that, and I'd love to hear that. Like how, when you're working with someone and they're so inclined, if they've understand their trigger emotion, anxiety, fear, sadness, whatever it is, and they know, then they go to the kitchen, raid the presses, and maybe binge eat, whatever it is. But how do you look at that person and say, how are we going to slow that process down so you have a chance to think?
Yeah. There's lots of ways potentially to do that, but as you said, it is trying to buy yourself that moment. It just has to be a moment of mindfulness.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about skills development in a therapeutic context.
Yeah.
So I'm always banging on about it, in fact, because the analogy I use is that, let's say you run and you're planning to do a marathon, you wouldn't ever think of showing up on the day to run the marathon without having done any training. Okay, it's a very high stakes situation, saying I want to run this marathon. It's a pretty big undertaking, to say the least. You accumulate a lot of training sessions in the build up to that. So I draw the same comparison to developing like regulation skills in a therapeutic sense. And I think
I like that, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So, because this is a problem that my clients will run into a lot. Like we'll go through one or a couple of the techniques in a minute, but the actual implementation of the technique is hard to do under duress, or
for sure,
when about to run the marathon, in that analogy.
Yeah. So
if you are very distressed, it's quite hard to bring yourself even to do that bit of regulation, right? And that was a difficulty a lot of people were having. So, you mentioned habit stacking a few minutes ago, and that's basically how I would start to build that skill. Is like, okay, we'll take something that you do on a daily basis or multiple times per day, attach some of these therapeutic skills to that.
Yeah.
So that you get reps in and you get practice in doing those. And then, with accumulated practice and you get better at it, then you're more likely to be able to use it when you actually need it.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting. It's like saying on the marathon day, I'm going to do my best, but I have been doing nothing before the marathon.
Yeah.
So when you're really stressed and someone says, do some meditation, you don't have the skill yet. You do not have the skill. Same with all the vagus exercises. Like, you haven't done them enough that you're actually increasing vagal tone and feeling rest and digest mode after doing them. So it is like that delayed gratification of, you're going to be putting in the reps, you're not going to feel much different for a while, but you are developing the skill. And that's huge. Like, I think it's such a thing, a throwaway statement. People say, do a bit of deep breathing, or, go for a walk. But you don't find the benefit in them yet because you don't do them consistently. And I think that's just a massive point. Like, and you always hear that, when people say helpful advice about calming down, but the person has never experienced been calm from any of these tools. So it's important to do it not in the middle of the storm. You're practicing before it. Yeah.
Another analogy I've just thought of there is like, let's say you're at home and you suddenly spring a leak in the house, right? If you don't have the tools available to solve that, then you're like, I have to go down to Woody's now and buy something to fix that.
Yeah.
What are the chances of you doing that while, your house is potentially flooding?
Yeah. I was about to say I'll do another analogy, but I won't. Just throw in another one. But yeah, that's so it. Like, and I think most people don't get that. And realizing as well, say if you've been chronically stressed for years and you're not used to feeling regulated at all, that's going to take longer for you to maybe sigh on, swallow, and feel relaxation after you do a technique. It just takes that little bit longer. You still will get there. It just, instead of a person that's fairly relaxed all the time, it might take them a few days to notice benefit. Whereas the person that's chronically stressed, it might take a few weeks or more.
Yep.
It's just like sit with it. And knowing that most people don't continue with meditation because they don't see the benefit immediately.
Yeah.
And that's just something to really take in. I think over the years, I didn't have, like in my early 20s when it was the peak really for me of the disordered eating, I didn't have them tools. I really didn't. And then it was this cycle of not being able to sleep properly because I was so stressed out about food. I was anxious a lot of the time. It just permeated my entire life. Food was the only thing I really thought about for a good few years in my 20s. And then I had amenorrhea, I had no cycle, I had all the stuff of the imbalances off the back of it. And I just think back, if I had to redo that time of my life again, regulation would have been such a huge part of it for me, because you obviously get much more restorative sleep when you're regulated as well. So yeah, when I think back of that, plus then really understanding why I was doing it, that took me so many years to understand the why. Like, why is this actually benefiting me at that time? Because there was a reason for doing it.
Yeah.
There actually was a reason. It was an avoidance mechanism. So it's interesting when you look at it as a whole concept. Like, it's not, I don't see it as a bad thing when you look back, because you knew you needed it at the time. But it's knowing that you can replace the tools.
Yeah.
It's just you have to build the skills.
Yes. Yeah.
Best
way you know how at the time.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's something I bring in a lot at the start with clients in this context, because I don't want them to feel like they're fighting with themselves.
Yeah.
And so if we frame it as like, well, you're trying to help yourself in the best way you know how, based on the tools that you have and the skills that you have. But if we can develop more skills, and that kind of cyclical nature to it is so annoying, like, as well, because it's like, if you are more stressed and then you're not sleeping as well, and then you're feeling worse, and
physiologically that's impacting your hunger levels as well.
Yeah.
But I think, like, when we look at creating space, that's a skill I didn't have then. Like, I was not able to create the space for them emotions. And I know that's something you do with clients. Like, obviously a lot of it is about creating the space. So what does that look like for you, like, when we talk about that?
Yeah. So in terms of where someone can find skills for these kind of things, I think dialectical behavior therapy is really helpful, or DBT. And when you apply it to something like eating problems, there's three main components of it, where there's mindfulness, there's building distress tolerance, and then there's emotional regulation. And they're the main ways it's used. And it's used, more in binge eating and say bulimia tendencies and emotional eating, not so much for anorexia.
Yeah.
But in terms of creating space, so that's, you can look at that as maybe distress tolerance or maybe emotional regulation. There's many ways you can, different like skills you can try with this, but say in session, someone can, we can sort of rehearse a given situation and rehearse them actually feeling how they're going to feel in response to that, and then applying some of these skills in that sort of more contained environment. There's an exercise that I really like from this is another therapeutic modality, acceptance commitment therapy, which is really helpful here. A lot of these are kind of offshoot of cognitive behavior therapy, right? So that they're referred to often as third wave CBT, right? So I'll say a lot of acronyms in therapy, but bear with me.
Yeah.
But there's an exercise in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is expansion, which is sort of like a meditation. A lot of these third wave CBTs have a mindfulness component to them. So it's kind of like a mindfulness meditation where you will take the sense, and you can find these on, say, YouTube and stuff, and I'm sure on like podcast apps as well, like guided versions of these. But basically the premise is that, like, you find the sensation that you're experiencing and try and describe it as much as you can, right? Which is kind of unusual when it's like just a physical sensation. So you're talking about like, what color is it? What shape is it?
Yeah.
Is it hot or is it cold? And then there's some breath work involved. And you're sort of doing this visualization of creating space for this, that like, no matter how big it gets, you can always cope with it or tolerate it or have room for it, essentially. So it's like, you asked me about creating space. It's like literally an exercise of space creation. And like I said, there's lots of other...
I actually did that one the other day.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And it was like a feeling of dread. And for me, it looked like a grey stone in the middle of my chest.
Interesting.
And you know, when you actually have to describe it, because I was like, it feels like nothing. Like initially it feels like nothing, you know, and then you have to go in, oh wow, it actually feels dark. It feels heavy. It feels kind of like tight in my chest. And then I think when you can articulate that, that's so helpful, because then the next time you feel that sensation, like it's not confusing, first of all, because I think that's a huge part of anything around eating, there's confusion. So eating just like brings you further into confusion because you don't even know why you're feeling that way. But if you can sit with it and understand, I'm feeling like this is the sensation in my body, and the next thing I want to do is eat to like fill up that sensation, almost like fill it, stuff it away, not have to deal with it. And I think anyone that's listening, it's really important to remember so much can be helped when you realize, first of all, this isn't something you're stuck with forever. Again, it's like something you've learned that is unlearnable when you get the right tools, and know that like the process doesn't need to be this really long, messy process. Like mine took me a very long time because I didn't have the correct tools at the time. But when you delve into it with the right tools, and like even now I can feel that sensation that when I was in the middle of a lot of restriction, okay, so very little food for days, and then I'd go into the opposite, which would be overeat. That feeling was like an outer body experience where I'm overeating and I don't want to do it. My brain's telling me stop it, like stop the entire thing. But I was still continuing to do it. And it's such an out of control experience. And a huge part of it for me was control.
Yeah.
So the restriction for me was control, because it was one part of my life I had full control of, was the restrict. So the overeat then felt so out of control and so uncomfortable that then you'd over-restrict again to compensate. And then you get back into weeks. And especially it was when I lived in Dubai in my early 20s. And like me and a friend actually, and we were both in a similar situation with a good bit of disordered eating. And then we'd binge drink at the weekend, you know. And then when you're binge drinking, obviously, you lose a sense of control completely. And I remember one night, and we came back from the night out. It was probably like 3 a.m, and we both sat down on the ground like we were intoxicated, and we were both like, we are so hungry. And this is thinking back, like the fact that we thought this was normal. We made this huge pot of porridge, right? Huge pot of porridge, and ate that, like over ate that, because we were like, oh, at least we won't feel too guilty if it's not like the stuff we want to eat, you know? And it was just that, when I look back and reflect at that, it was just, you can be in a realm of normalizing a lot of things, and you have to take stock and think like, what about my eating patterns on a day-to-day basis can be improved? Like, is there any little thing? Like now, it's obviously in terms of physical hunger, it's so much easier for me because I'm meeting all my nutritional needs. I'm nourishing my body with enough fat, protein, complex carbs, vegetables, etc. Regular meals, eating mindfully. Like I'm doing all the things, whereas I wasn't doing any of them in my 20s. So my body was actually, there was so much physical hunger, but there was also so much emotional hunger. That brings me on to that differentiation. Like, and you talk about that a lot, physical hunger versus emotional. What are actually the differences? And stopping for a moment and asking yourself the question, like, what is this in the body, and getting familiar with either one? Because I think a lot of people can't differentiate between the two. Yeah.
So physical hunger is usually a bit slower to come on. It's more of a gradual process, and it sort of builds up slowly over a period of time, whereas emotional hunger can be a lot more acute in terms of its onset and how you feel it. In emotional hunger, you will usually want like specific foods, which are, again, these ones that are most comforting, usually high calorie, high fat, high sugar, sweet. If people are angry, they might favor crunchy foods because you're getting that like crunch, like breaking something,
Yes.
you're getting that bit of release. So that could be something else to look out for. Whereas with physical hunger, it's a lot broader, a range of foods that you would be like, yeah, I would like to eat that now because I'm physically quite hungry. I would also look at, how long has it been since someone's last meal so they can assess that. So it's like, okay, if it has been, 3, 4, 5 hours or so, then it's probably time for me to eat again. There's probably a physical component to this. And so the emotional aspect feels a lot more urgent than the physical one. And they're the main differences.
I think it's interesting when you're consuming social media and the level of guilt and shame you can feel when you see people that are showing, what I eat in a day, okay? And they're showing you like this, and they're really lean, and they're showing you these nourishing foods, okay? But you're so far away from that. And plus you think a lot of things they're eating are terrifying, like nut butter and all these things. And I think like that's something to really understand, that your subconscious mind is seeing that and you're actually feeling a hit of guilt every time you see people eat these nourishing foods because you're so far away from that. Like, and even what feels normal to you, like, and what feels normal around your behavior around food. And I think like the contrast between that and social media is just very profound. And I still feel that some days when I see, and now as well, like I've really cleaned up my algorithm in terms of not following or consuming any content that brings them thoughts. But how do people approach that when they're consuming a lot of social media? And of course, what's the main thing you consume on social media if you have, disordered eating disorder, is food.
Yeah.
All I consumed for years was recipes.
Yes.
Okay, recipes, all that's on your mind. So how do you navigate that with clients? Like that they're obsessed with food because you're so physically usually and emotionally hungry. And you're trying to, and as well, that is going back years ago. So there wasn't the level of, it was more simple then on social media. Like it was just simple recipes. Like it wasn't anything. Now it's, people are making boiled eggs, mixing them with chocolate. Like there's just things that are mental. Yeah, I saw a really weird muffin recipe with boiled eggs and there was like 100,000 likes and people were like, what a great idea. And I was like, this is insane. But it was like the woman that was doing it was ultra lean. So people were like, there you go.
Sure.
I'm going to eat that because she eats that and I want to look like that.
Yeah, there's always that either implied or explicit, like, I eat this way to look like this.
Exactly.
Which is, I think that part of it can be problematic.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really have anything against, like, people sharing what they eat.
Yeah.
But it's like the ab check at the start of the video.
Yes, we're over it.
Then say, oh, this is what I eat in a day.
Yes. And that as well, a reminder, like, warning, we are all so different metabolically, height, weight, age, there's muscle mass, there's so many different factors. That means if I ate what that girl ate, my body would look completely different. And people keep forgetting that. Like there's that constant, that, 2 + 2 = 4. If I eat what she eats, I will look like that. Simple, ding ding. But we easily go into that.
Yeah.
But like, how do people get out of that? And that's a massive thing for so many of my clients. Like when they first come on board and they're like, I just want a meal plan. I just want to know exactly what to eat because I'm so confused.
Yeah.
And there's so much myths out there. And even before this, I was listening to a podcast about the myths even now in 2024. And we have so much evidence and there's still so much myths because people that speak with conviction and have a big following, if they say something, it is taken as true. And that's terrifying because I've seen huge accounts put up really misleading stuff.
Yeah.
And like, what are the myths you're seeing now with people coming into you saying like, well, I couldn't eat that because this is my belief around that?
Yeah. I was working with a client recently who's anorexic and orthorexic and they were consuming a huge amount of like health, nutrition content.
Yeah.
And getting a lot of this misleading messaging. And like, I think some of that messaging, some of it seems a bit daft, but then there's the more insidious one that is very pseudoscientific and does seem to make sense. And I was talking to a few people yesterday about this on social media, ironically, but like about like why are people becoming, this is kind of going a bit off topic, like so anti-establishment and like
tin hats.
Yeah, it's like you'll have people, you know, Gary that I work with gets a lot of this because he's got a fairly decent platform and he's a doctor, and there's people who blatantly say to him that like, I trust you less because you're a doctor.
Oh my gosh.
And you know, and then like that obviously ignores the fact, they're just ignorant to the fact that he's like spent the last decade working in fitness and nutrition, right? So he's lifestyle first anyway. But that's the sort of extreme version of that. It's like, you know, because you're a doctor, I trust you less. And then, you know, honest science communicators and health communicators are going to be more nuanced in their conversations. Like you said, they speak with so much conviction, whereas like, or sorry, the kind of misleading people speak with so much conviction, whereas honest communicators can't, in good faith, speak with the same level. So it's a lot more believable. And then if there is some sort of seemingly logical rationale for what they're talking about, it just makes it all the more attractive to buy into it. But sorry, I was saying that with that client, you know, they were consuming a huge amount of health and nutrition content, and I found it very helpful, like in terms of doing therapy. I was able to have very nuanced discussions with him about nutrition as well because of my background there. Whereas if I was like not trained as a nutritionist, it would be difficult. So like, you know, I could present them with evidence and they would take that on board, and you know, they would say, okay, I didn't realize that like this stuff was misleading because of these reasons. But it is very challenging. And yeah, I think you have to, like you did, like be very sort of clinical about cleaning up your feed and what you're exposing yourself to.
Especially initially when you're like really putting in the work to make change. You have to be so selective with what you're consuming. And even yesterday I was in the sauna after the gym, and there was this conversation between two guys, and they were like, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to eat dinner after my workout, but I need to, within a half an hour of doing my workout, I have to consume something. So I just have this protein shake and I just make sure I have it with like low fat milk. And I was like, that's their fact. That is their fact. These two guys, like, this is their fact. And all the time, actually, it's always the son I hear talk about nutrition. And there's other people like saying, oh, you know, I do fasted cardio and that works for me. Or other people saying, and like, oh my God, there's so many different things. And especially now with this, like, it's kind of died down a little bit, but you know, the wooden boards and the, you know, carnivore diet was a bit crazy for a while. And people were like, that's now my truth. I can only eat like that. That's the only healthful way for me to eat. And everything's so nuanced and complex and grey. People hate that.
Yeah.
But it's realizing like where you are in the world, what you have access to, what your income is, how your body responds to different foods. There's so many ways why every single person will have a different daily eating pattern that works for them. And there is that thing of like, you have to find the sweet spot for you, your meal timings, the foods you like, the foods you digest well if you haven't done work with, you know, gut health healing or whatever. And there's just so many bits to it. And like even the way you metabolize carbohydrates comparing to someone else and what works well for your body. And it's just so different. But them two guys, like, they're like, you know, protein shake, done. Body nourished, temple. Like, it's just so funny because, again, both of them, actually, two confident guys, spoke with a lot of conviction. I was like, oh, will I buy this protein powder? You know, you can be so easily influenced, even though I've spent like, you know, over a decade now really dialed into nutrition. And still, it's so easy to deviate. And like, for many years, I was vegan. Many years. And at that time, I was like, I would never touch an animal or dairy product again.
Yes.
You know? So it's just so interesting. Like, there's different chapters of your life as well when you need more nutrients, like peri versus post-menopause. Your diet will probably slightly change then in terms of your needs energy-wise. And it's knowing that like every chapter may be different for you. And I think people hate that because they just want like, I want to eat like this forever. I want to simplify it. And you can do that. But there is a complexity to it. And so it's always changed. Like even when I had kids, my diet has changed now. Yeah. You know, probably a lot of mothers will notice that your diet's going to change with kids.
Yep.
And same with all the women I work with that are peri and post-menopause. They're going to need a little bit more emphasis on the protein, on strength training, on gut health, you know, and it's just acknowledging that is important, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a lot of what you do. And you're I'm preaching to the converted.
Yeah.
But for somebody that's starting and they have a very, very little insight into what's best for their body, and they're very confused with all the different things on the internet, how do you start with someone like that needs guidance, and they need to understand what's best for them, and they need to understand that like just eating the plain porridge in the morning, the little salad at lunch, and then overeating in the evening isn't where you want to be?
Yeah, a lot of it is like exploring and being curious about like, is there another perspective on this? Like for the client, you know, is there another perspective on this that's different to this belief that I hold?
Yeah.
You know, like people can get very rigid in their thinking and in their routines, especially if they have an eating disorder.
Yeah.
And a lot of the therapeutic process is like, you know, right, well, what would it be like for that to be different? Or like what might other people do who maybe aren't the same as you? And just that can start to open the door to other perspectives on that. And then for someone actually getting started with this stuff, I mean, I would do like a sort of diet and lifestyle assessment with them first to see what seems like a good starting point. But I also say a lot that like the best diet for anything is the best diet for everything in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is like the same dietary pattern, similar components to it are going to be the best for most people most of the time. So that dietary template doesn't change that much. As you said, there's like different considerations to make, but that's kind of tweaking probably 10, 20% versus like the 80% of what's going to be pretty common across the board.
That works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes for any sort of, you know, health outcome, I would say. Because then like, you know, if you're healthy, you're healthy, you know, so you'll reduce your risk of all sort of chronic diseases like by following that kind of a dietary pattern, which, you know, is emphasis on plants and fruits and vegetables, emphasis on fiber, emphasis on higher fiber carbohydrates most of the time, emphasis on, you know, lean protein sources, and mostly unsaturated fats. Like, you know, if I'm just going to throw out those few things to people, like that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
And then there's obviously some nuance to it as well, and you adjust based on preferences and different lifestyle contexts. You have to do that, of course.
Yeah.
But you know, if someone is in that example that you gave, like this sort of undereating earlier in the day and then overeating in the evening, you know, I would start there and then start to make sure that they're eating regularly, because that can be a major predisposing factor for binge eating, is that like people are skipping meals. So you want to start with a regular eating pattern that, you know, you make those meals earlier in the day bigger, you know, because people get it into their head that's like, well, I have to eat, you know, quote unquote light earlier in the day because I overeat in the evening. So I need to compensate.
Yeah.
But you only overeat in the evening in a lot of cases because you've eaten too little early in the day. Now there's the emotional eating side of it, which is a little bit different in fairness, but you still also need to nourish yourself earlier in the day anyway, you know.
That was two like massive factors that helped me, was eating a higher protein with some fat breakfast, which I hadn't done for years. And that really, I could not believe how consistent my energy levels and how like my hunger became so much less. And then the same with lunch. If I had the lunch that was nourishing, your evening eating is so different.
Yeah.
Even your mood is different because your blood sugars are balanced and you're feeling more calm. Like you're not in that stress response of when you're undernourished. And that goes such a long way. Along with, and that's a huge part, and I always say to clients, the joyless day obviously is a huge part of overeating in the evening or emotional eating, because you've just had a very joyless, underwhelming day. And that's, I think, a massive part of it for me, was like finding more time to get into the flow state, finding more pockets of the day that I could have a mindful moment, more times I could find even 5 or 10 minutes to go outside.
Yeah.
And them little factors that everyone talks about, like, you know, do your stupid mental health walk and, you know, do, you know, them kind of little mindful moments, and that they go such a long way, and you stack them up during the day. So then your evening, you don't feel this incredible urge to find some dopamine, serotonin in food. And I think that's just like what I just said there is so incredibly simple, but most people do not do it.
Yeah.
They do not do it. And they say, oh, you know what? I'll do all my good stuff in the evening because my day is too busy. So you're trying to pack in your journaling, your Vegas exercises, your breath work, all that into the evening when it should be just dispersed throughout the day, because more than likely in the evening you won't want to do it because you'll be looking for a quicker hit, you know, and that's really important to acknowledge. Like I was so hungry for some level of fulfillment in the evening, pardon the pun, like be it food, whatever it was, but I didn't know other things that brought me the same level of distraction or joy as food. And over time, you know, you find little things, and they don't need to be anything mad. Like you don't need to join a triathlon club or a hang gliding club or skiing or diving or something. You just need simplistic things that bring you some level of, oh, this is nice feeling. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
That's, it's one of the, say, DBT components of improving emotional regulation. They talk about accumulating positive emotions. So it's like all that stuff you just said, little stuff, but those little things obviously add up across the course of a day, course of a week, sort of improves your emotional baseline.
Yeah.
Which means there's less of a deficit to dig yourself, to exit out of with this like big surge of a hit in the evening time, like you're saying.
And that took me a while, like to construct my day. So I like had a 10-minute meditation in the morning. Then during the afternoon, I'd like do some level of, you know, havening or cradling or like even massage your own neck. Something like that gave me like 1 or 2 minutes of headspace. Progressive muscle relaxation you throw into the afternoon, whatever it may be. And then throughout the day, I was like seeking ways to find more of that because I was like, that felt good. That gave me a mental break of overthinking, because I was like massively addicted to overthinking, like many people are. And when you have more of them respites, like I'm drinking my tea and I'm saying I actually don't need to keep playing the to-do list in my mind. I can actually drink this tea and notice the taste of it, the smell of it, obviously everything you do when you're being mindful. And then another like huge part of it as well is the mindful eating part, which a lot of people actually feel like guilt for doing because they feel like you're not being productive and squeezing every drop of productivity out of your workday. And I think like that's a huge thing that you must focus on, and that you actually on one of my lives did a really nice, I think it was 5, 10, 15.
Yeah.
Yeah, explain that, because I thought so much people came back to me after that live and said, that's really helped me.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it. The 5, 10, 15 rule. So yeah, as you said, mindful eating is one of the things I start with almost everybody. There's the 5, 10, 15 component. And then for people who are binging or emotional eating, then I have an intensive exercise that I do that's like mindful eating with all the 5 senses.
Yes.
So we can talk about that as well if you like. But the 5, 10, 15 denotes 5 deep, relaxing breaths before eating a meal. All right, so this will improve digestion as well, but it does also buy you a bit of that headspace, a bit of calm, a bit of
so important. Yeah.
Here's what's to come. I'm about to take, a bit of time for myself and enjoy a nice meal, hopefully. The 10 denotes the seconds between like mouthfuls of food or bites. So put the food down, put the knife and fork down, put the spoon down, whatever it is, and focus on spending a bit more time in the eating process.
Yeah.
And then the 15 denotes 15 minutes to actually eat the meal.
That actually, a load of people were like, 15 minutes to eat a meal? That's so long. They were freaking out because usually it was like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
They were just like wolfing it down. People were like, and initially a lot of people said they did that for like a week and it was so uncomfortable the first week because they were like, this is taking so long. They were like dying to grab their phone or dying for a distraction. And it's a hugely, it highlights a lot actually about your whole day, how you eat the meal. Huge. And I feel like it's such a basic human need to eat a meal like in a relaxed state. And now I know I have toddlers, well, they're not really toddlers anymore, they're 4. But when they were like 1, 2, 3, oh my God, eating a meal mindfully is tough work. But it can be done. You just have to be strategic about it.
Yeah.
And and I think that 15 minutes of a minimum. If you were like, that's my minimum, I'm eating the meal for 15 minutes. And then you're like, okay, my phone's not anywhere near. I'm not watching telly. I'm in, sitting comfortably, whatever it may be. That's like massive because like you say, it's a huge help to your digestion. You're absorbing the nutrients better, blah, blah, blah. But it's also for you, that's another mindful moment to your day.
Yeah.
Another pocket of joy, let's say. It's another thing to your day.
Because you get to have like a tasty, satisfying meal.
Yes.
Hopefully. Like
And you taste it.
Yeah. And then like part of the point is that it starts to train the internal regulation of eating.
Yeah.
Rather than the externalized one, which would be like, being obsessed with something like, tracking calories or following a specific diet or meal plan. That's all very externalized. Whereas I want to work with a lot of people on like mindful components of eating, intuitive components of eating that, you eat enough to feel satisfied.
Yes.
But you don't eat while distracted because that's not part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it means that people enjoy their meals more. As you said, they get that nice like 15-minute potentially window to themselves. And look, I work with plenty of clients who have small kids, and we have to agree on like which meals are more practical for this to be done in, right? I'm not I'm not going to say to people that like, well, you have to just do it like no matter what.
Even if they're on your head, you still have to do it mindfully. Even if you've been slapped in the face. Okay. It's all good.
So, and then it also helps prevent overeating, which is what a lot of people want to get out of it, because by taking your time, you can notice your fullness more. By being mindful, you can also notice your fullness more. And then, you aim to stop around sort of contented rather than overly full or stuffed, because if people eat too quickly, then like once they hit that 15-20 minute mark, they're like, oh, I'm way too full now.
Yeah. And that was a big one for me. Like I'd eat the food as fast as I could to almost like not register it. And then that feeling of being really full was like almost the goal.
Okay.
It was like, if I do this really fast, it didn't even happen.
Yeah.
That overeating didn't even happen. Like it didn't exist. But I think like dialing everything down. And even if you're the most highly strung, rushed person, again, you can build that skill so that it's normal for you to have slow down the whole day. Like that is just something that will become normal to you once you do it more. And I think there's a huge part around, and everyone's talking about like reset your dopamine levels, and how essentially do you get joy in the simple things rather than only the big things are giving you joy, like the holidays and all the other things that in the moment bring you that quick bit of pleasure and joy. How do you dial back to be that person that enjoys the simple things of the day so that the meal is enjoyable in itself? So are the mindful moments. So are all the things that sound incredibly boring to most people, like meditation, Vegas exercises. How do you get to a point where a client is like, I'm loving my routine of all the little things I've habit stacked into my day, and I feel like I'm really making progress with enjoying the meals?
Yeah, because life is made up of the smaller moments,
We forget that.
Want to make the most of those. And like a lot of this stuff ties together, because it reminds me then of, say, I'll do like a lot of body image work with clients, which is important. So some of the exercises I'll get them to do are, body gratitude. And people often struggle with this. And look, they're more likely to struggle with it the more they need to do it.
Yeah.
Because they find it difficult that they're in a difficult situation with how they feel about their body. That's part of what they need help with. That's fine. But in terms of like the body gratitude, one thing I ask them to answer is like, list one thing that you're grateful for that you've experienced thanks to your body. And it's like literally everything, because whatever 5 senses you have available to you, all of that is facilitated by your body. So it's like giving somebody a hug, having a nice coffee, having a nice meal, seeing a sunset, all that kind of stuff. Like none of that happens unless your body facilitates it.
It's amazing all the work I did on this exact thing in therapy and how long it took me to get a handle on this.
Yeah.
Because it's so hard to appreciate them things when you're stuck in a hateful experience of your body.
Yes.
But again, it's perseverance and reframing all the time. Like imagine I couldn't. That's actually what helped me go in the reverse. Imagine I couldn't give the hug to that person. Imagine I couldn't walk. And that's for me how I got into, instead of saying I love my body, you start at the other end of the spectrum, saying like imagine I couldn't do this, and then it's more neutral, and then finally you're accepting, and then finally you're seeing actually things you do like.
Yeah.
And it's just a process.
Yeah, and like this is an important point for anyone going through this process. You can dislike your body or parts of your body and also take care of it.
Yes. And that's such an important point. And the other part for me that actually really helped me, right? I used to visualize, okay, so there's my body, right? The only thing I don't like about my body is the extra fat, okay? Fat isn't even part of me. That's nothing to do with me. That's interchangeable. But the things that I like are like my hair, my skin, my eyes, my teeth. They are all me. The only part I don't like isn't even me. It's not even mine. Like it can come and go.
Mm-hmm.
And that for some reason really helped me. Like I don't actually hate me. It's only this fat component that I dislike.
Mm.
And that just took away so much of the power of like, it's not me. It's not me I'm hating. It's not me like self-worth wise. It just detached the two, if that makes sense. I don't know why it helped me so much, but I just saw that I could see the good then.
Yeah, like detaching that sense of self-worth from like your body composition essentially, rather than like the other components that make you, as you said.
Exactly.
It's really important because, you know, with eating disorders and disordered eating, you know, there's this overemphasis on the value that we put in body shape, body size.
Yeah.
And how that connects to self-worth. And then as a result, other areas of life get marginalized.
Yes.
So everything else becomes narrower when this aspect, you know, widens basically. It's often, you know, visualized on a pie chart. So if you imagine that like, you know, body shape and size takes up a huge chunk of this pie. And then all the other important parts of your life have to be smaller by default.
Yeah.
And you see so much people engaging in conditional living, which is really sad.
Yeah.
And when people realize that, they feel sad about it. And that's understandable. Like,
it's a huge realization actually when you realize like a huge part of your very short life is so conditional on how much like body fat is on your body.
Yeah.
It's insane to think about like all the moments of being present you've missed.
Yeah.
And I can reflect on that and I've spent the time journeying on that because you miss so much things. You're just not present. You're not there for them. Your mind is elsewhere, you know. And even what you say, like the appreciating the body for the hug of someone, or for holding someone's hand, or for like seeing, you know, the green of the sunset. All them things you forget about, like they are life. It's none of the stuff like the cars, the house, the holidays. They don't really matter. They're like a very small percentage. You have to go back to basics and realize that they're the things that bring you joy. But we have to keep and reminded of that, because that's not like emphasized enough.
Yeah.
You know?
And the ironic thing is like a way to improve that is by doing the things that you are making conditional. So that's a big part of the work, is to try and get people to start engaging in these things, start widening the other aspects of their life. And, you know, when you see someone improving with an eating disorder or disordered eating, like that's often what it looks like. You know, they're socializing more, they're engaging in more hobbies.
Yeah.
And again, if we go back to earlier in the conversation, these are little things that make your day better.
Yeah.
Therefore, you might worry less about this body stuff at the same time. But, you know, I've clients who, you know, really would love to go on a certain holiday and won't book it because their body isn't ready for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know what I mean? Like next summer, is your health still going to be there? Are you still going to be alive? You know, like it's crazy how much you can put off life until like the circumstances are perfect. And I always say that, like, you move now. Now is the time to move. There is never a perfect circumstance, because when you get that dream body you really want, something else will get in the way of you being in the present, unless you're getting into the present now. Like there will be always something else. When I finally thought, okay, I'm happy with my body composition, I'm feeling okay, something else, then I want to drive on with my career. Then it's like, you know, there's just so many things. That's just human nature. Or
in that situation, maybe you achieve the body or at least get, you know, close enough to it.
Yeah.
And what often happens to people there is they just get anxious about trying to maintain it.
Yeah. Maintenance. Yes. That terrified me. I remember one summer coming back to Ireland from wherever I was living at the time, and I was in a state of so much anxiety for like the 2 months I was home. of like, oh, what if anyone notices my body fat's gone up? What? Oh my God, I'm eating out of routine now. Like worry constantly. And that's like, it stole the summer from me essentially, because you just are so worried about, even as well, the external looks of control of how people see you.
Oh,
that's
huge.
A massive part of it. It was nothing to do with me at all, actually. It was to do with what other people thought of me. And that's something to also really recognize.
Yeah, that's a huge amount of the work that I do with people on, the cognitive element of this kind of therapy is like, because a lot of it is down to the perceived judgment of the other and what that means to them.
Yeah.
And it's really important to work through, and it's really important to, as you said, consider, if you're listening to this now, it's like, what am I worried about in that sense? And then the role reversal, I think, is helpful there. It's like, if you see somebody, is your initial inclination to just start to disparage their body or like comment on how it's changed.
Yeah.
And look, unfortunately, some people will do that, but I think that's mostly from a place of that insecurity and just perpetuating the sort of diet culture beliefs that they already hold.
For sure, yeah.
So they're stuck in that themselves, and then can perpetuate it, which definitely makes it more difficult to, if you're in an environment with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's why I was saying at the start, these things that influence our body image and our relationship with food, it's like how the people around you talk about this stuff is important.
Oh yeah, hugely. And like even growing up with all my aunties, they would always have said, geez, she looks terrible, she put on weight. And that was always said anytime there was a meetup or and as well, there's like all the time speaking about people's appearance. That was like very much always done, and saying like, oh, that's too big of a portion, don't eat that. Like was like very much normal in our growing up. So of course then you're, that's like ingrained almost in you, and you have to unlearn it. Yeah. So it's really important to reflect back and think like and I think that concept you hear a lot now online, like the almond mom, so it's basically the mother that's always like controlling your food intake.
Okay.
And she's like, oh, swap that chocolate bar for an apple, minute on the hips, or lips forever on the hips kind of thing. Nothing tastes as good as being skinny. That's what they say, like, is the almond mom. And I think a lot more people have that than we recognize, because like you see the videos go so viral because people are like, this is my mother. And now there's even an almond husband.
Okay.
And he's like saying, oh, don't eat that. Like it's not within your goals. I think that's so important, how there's probably one or two people in your life that you need to just look at in an objective way and think, how have they influenced my relationship with food? And not looking at them in a bad way or anything, just saying like, how have I internalized that? And just questioning, just being curious about it. Like, how has that influenced the way I see food? And then once you have the self-awareness, that's so powerful. Once you can fully understand, like I fully believed that a woman was ugly unless she was super thin, because that's what they believed. And I completely internalized that. So, deconstructing that is so important, and having like self-compassion for that person, because they're obviously living in that state, but also for yourself for absorbing it.
And then I would also zoom out again and say, okay, well, who influenced those people?
Exactly.
And eventually you will get to, a cultural component to this. And an exercise I sort of, I suppose, a thought experiment I do with clients on this stuff is like, I say to them, imagine I'm an extraterrestrial come down to Earth, know nothing about planet Earth. And I'm talking to you and you're saying, my body isn't okay because I'm too big. And I just keep ask questions about that. Then I say, okay, well, what's too big about it? Like what's wrong with it? And then going down that line of questioning.
Yeah.
And again, we're assuming I have like zero prior.
Yeah. And you're like, why is that ugly? Like, why is having extra fat ugly?
Yeah. And they find it difficult.
Like,
but it also helps get to the root of some of where this thinking and these beliefs come from.
Yeah.
And then we can explore again, like you're saying, being curious about, well, what if it was different?
Yeah.
And I'm always asking people, how do you know what you're supposed to look like?
Yeah.
And what influences that? Other people's opinions are just opinions, but you know, what's driving this whole process? And again, I think there's a larger kind of societal and cultural element to
that's
that.
like that. The scenario I grew up in was like a small percentage. The diet culture and friendship groups are a whole other thing of extremely influential, and probably the media being the most influential by a huge amount of the 90s culture we grew up in, you know. And just like that was the era of super skinny models, and there was no, you know, now at least there's some level of acknowledgement that everyone's body is meant to be different. That wasn't in the 90s.
No.
So of course we grew up as children totally jaded, completely. So like there was just, it's so multifactorial as well. Like there's so many things that influence where you're at now with it. But deconstructing it and just thinking about yourself as an individual is so important instead of like generalizing it. Of, you know, I think comparison is very much the thief of joy as well in this.
Yeah.
And like comparing to friendship groups, comparing to people online, that's a huge part of it. And trying to work with someone to keep them in their own lane so that they're not continuously comparing. But in order to not be continuously comparing, you do have to have some level of headspace and stop, you know, and creating space, which takes time and building the skills.
Yeah, this stuff takes a while to unlearn and improve upon. I don't know if I shared this example with you before, but it's one I use a lot where just this idea of body image ideals and how they change with the times. You know, like I said, the 90s, the kind of, was it the heroin chic, they call it. There's a poster or like an ad that I used from like a magazine. I got it from a seminar I went to before on eating disorders, but it's from like the 50s, I think. And it's like one of these like hand-drawn kind of ads, right? So it's a woman of like normal size. She's not super skinny. Speaking to a woman who is quite thin, and it's like an ad for this like highly nutritious drink or something where it's like, hey, if you drink this, you'll put some meat on your bones and then people will think you're attractive.
Wow. It just shows how we've been conditioned a certain way. And most people listening to this are probably like, oh my God, like it actually isn't fact.
Yes.
What I'm thinking about the way my body should look.
Yes. And like there's a lot of layers to this, unfortunately, because like, as you said, if enough people are sort of taken in by this and hold these beliefs, then that does make things the way that they are in terms of the lived experience.
Yeah.
And, you know, things like weight stigma are very real, unfortunately. So there is this emphasis on like smaller is better. But I was like, where do you draw the line on that?
That's it. And as well, it's like, what's the healthiest version of your body? There has to take that into consideration as well. So yeah, it's such a process of just thinking like, what do I feel? What's my best feeling, you know, in my body for many different factors. Yeah. Which is a lot to think about. But yeah, I think it's such a good area to put a bit of thought into though, because you might have been chasing a number on the scales for a very long time that's never come. And you have to ask yourself, like, is this actually achievable? Does this feel good with my body? Like, why? Because that number for most women is like a number they looked at when they were a teenager and was like, I can never go above this number. If I go above this number, things are terrible. And I think you hear that a lot with postpartum women, peri-postmenopause, and different times of your life when the scales will change. And there's an acceptance level of that as well. Yeah. Which is, I think now, like, I'm in my early 30s, a lot of my friends are having kids, and there's always that like, oh, I need to rush into like getting back to normal. But normal's different now. Your normal's different. Like you have a child now, you're a completely different person. Your mother, your normal's different, and understanding that it's the same at different points of your life when your circumstances really change. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's worth like acknowledging. But one last question. For anyone that's listening to this and they are really struggling with emotional eating or an eating disorder or anything in that realm of just not being happy with their body, what would you say to them in terms of like starting to make change? Like what's the first thing they can do psychologically or actually physically to move forward, to move the needle?
Yeah, I think, if you have an eating disorder, then if you have access and means, like I would say, please get support for that, because they can be dangerous depending on what someone is dealing with. I would say that things can get a lot better in terms of how you think about your body, how you feel about your body, how your behaviors, reflect that, because a lot of people engage in avoidant behavior or, kind of self-destructive behavior in relation to some things like body image. Yeah. So I would say get support, like if possible, in terms of something like maybe, therapy is, the most evidence-based way to address a lot of these things, depending on the type of disordered eating it is, or eating disorder, or CBT. Someone who's trained in CBT enhanced, potentially just the eating disorder specific CBT. Yeah. But I also think, like, if it's emotional eating, for example, DBT skills are so beneficial. So I know you can look those up, sort of DBT skills for emotional eating or whatever the issue is that you're dealing with, and then start to try and practice some of those on a regular basis. Like we were saying, don't try and run a marathon without having done any training. So you can look up, the stop technique, for example. Yeah. There's another one, the tip skills for distress tolerance, for example, is another good one. Yeah. Proactive problem solving is another sort of exercise from CBT that you can use in these contexts. So there's a lot of potential starting places, but having an awareness of these things and why this stuff happens for you, and like trying to get some sort of support, even if it is self-help. Yeah. That's obviously good. Potentially the book Intuitive Eating is worth a read in terms of like an approach to eating that's going to be helpful. There are books on, say, DBT for eating issues as well. There are, good books on body image too. So those are maybe a few places to potentially start. Yeah, I know.
A few start points, nice.
Trying to cover a lot of ground there. Yeah.
Now, a lot of people listening to this are in the US, so you're going to have to spell your name to find you on social media, and how people can find you.
Yeah, awesome. So my name is Brian O'Hengisa, and that's spelled OHAONGHUSA.
Even an Irish person would struggle with that.
100% they do. Yeah, most Irish people have never heard of it, and can't pronounce it. So,
what name is it in English?
Hennessy.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah. There you go. So I'm active on Instagram at Brian O'Hengisa. Not really active on other social media platforms, in fairness. Then we've also got the business one is Triage Method. Which again is a multidisciplinary team with lots of online coaching services and education services. If you're a professional looking to upskill in things like nutrition coaching or sleep specialist coaching or stress specialist coaching. Actually, that's coming. I don't know if that'll probably be out by the time this launches.
Yeah, it will be. Yeah.
It's not actually out yet. And then we've got loads of content on our website, loads of free articles, also on the YouTube, and we have a podcast as well. So all that is Triage Method. And then
nice.
I've done quite a lot of podcasts. So
I
think if you search my name on a podcast app, it'll bring back some results.
Yeah. You're everywhere, Brian.
And there's not that many people with the name Brian O'Hengisa, so helps filter it down.
Thanks so much for taking the time to come up and make the journey. I really, really appreciate it. I think people are going to get a lot of value from that.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.